To Brian Whetzel at North American Mortgage. Good morning, Brian.
Hi, John. How are you?
Fine, thanks. Brian, you were a branch manager, I believe, right?
Yeah.
With the down in the Fredericksburg, Virginia area.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Okay. Before we actually get into the body of the interview, all our listeners always we start off the same way. Everybody likes to know where everybody came from and where they went to school and kind of how they got in the business and when. So, why don't we start there?
Okay, John. I got into the business in 1996 during the refi boom, probably the same way a lot of my colleagues get into the business. I was a school teacher, and interestingly enough, reported to Michael Jordan's uncle as my principal. And it was, as you could imagine, he was a pretty intense man as well.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a small man. So he said all the height came from Jordan's mother's side. But from school teacher, I got married and started a family and wasn't earning enough money to make it. Had a friend that was in the mortgage business, and he said, right now we're begging for people, and came over and interviewed with Dominion Federal Savings and Loan, and started in the mortgage business in August of 1986.
Oh, you started in 86.
86.
Oh, okay.
1986.
So you were in the Bill.
1996 earlier.
Was Bill Waldy still running this deal over there at that time?
Yes, he was.
Yeah. Okay. I think I hear he's living happily ever after in Florida or something. But we will not go into that story.
Okay.
And anybody that's out there that knows the Bill Waldy story knows what we're talking about. Anyway, so you started in 86, and how long have you been with North American? You ended up at Perpetual, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Mm-hmm. In February of 88, I came over to Perpetual Savings Bank's mortgage company. It was called Perpetual Mortgage Company.
Which is a big moving shop. All the top hitters were there.
That's right. It was the number one mortgage company in the Metro D.C. market, and they hadn't done a lot with their Fredericksburg branch, and it was a great opportunity. And I came over and joined them in February of 88 as a loan officer, and in June of that same year was named manager of the office. And interestingly enough, hired 3 people that are still with me during that year. So we were started with a good core group of people in 1988 that are still here today, and what happened to Perpetual is also a story for another time probably, but they got caught up in the savings and loan crisis.
Sure.
And were taken over by the RTC. And from North American Mortgage Company, which was then an independent mortgage banker based in California, purchased the assets of Perpetual Mortgage in March of 92. And so that's how I got started with North American, and have been here, really 12 years at the same desk, but now with my third parent company, which is probably also a pretty common story.
Yeah, it is a common story, very familiar with the Perpetual story, and that one was a shame because it did get caught up, and for those new loan officers out there who don't know really what was going on back in this, it sounds very archaic. Really, you had savings and loans making loans what are called underwater. They weren't at market rates, had incredible teaser rates to attract people in. We're not flipping them out the back door to the secondary market because they would be in a loss position, and making construction loans and that were not done on sound economics, and eventually the whole pile kind of collapsed and took Perpetual with it. The shame of Perpetual was that it had people like Jay Elder and Mark Stam, people who were and huge producers, and it was a very quality organization in a sea of a mess that surrounded it. And so anyways, that's kind of what happened back there. I know you do about $30 million a year, and other than that, I believe we discussed you do primarily builder, but you also mix in some realtor. Rather than kind of dwelling on the past, I thought, why don't we kind of update it to today? And I guess my first question, why don't we start talking about the realtor business? or what are some of the, and I have to say, at the risk of sound like I'm jumping all over the place like a rabbit, which I'm capable of doing, your market area down in Fredericksburg, Virginia, as the crow flies, is probably 30 minutes driving, depending on this monstrous traffic. Gridlock, which is in the Washington metropolitan area, could probably take an hour from the Beltway to get down to Fredericksburg. But it is a huge, growing area. It was a sleepy little historical town, a lot of Civil War action down there, and all of a sudden now it's turning into a monster and huge growth pattern. So that's the market area you work in. With that in mind, let's talk about realtors. And the first thing I want to ask you are some of the changes, dramatic or not, that you have seen in the way business is conducted today versus when you started, and how, in particular, because I want to take this into a sales thing, what you see loan officers out there around the country need to do to deal with the new reality.
John, I think probably the biggest change has been the controlled business arrangements and the exclusion of loan officers from real estate offices, or our restriction. We used to have full access to those offices. In fact, we're warmly welcomed. When I first started the business, there were not any barriers to me to enter a real estate office, and today, as most of the people listening will understand, it's hard to get through the door initially. So I think one of the biggest challenges is becoming more creative in how we get to the customer. They're not just sitting there waiting for me to walk through the door anymore. I have had to become much more professional in the way I approach my sales approach toward those realtors. I have to work more by appointment. Do things more the way a professional salesperson would, where it used to be just load rate sheets in the car and drive around from spot to spot.
Mm-hmm. Well, what advice would you give, and understanding that there's some areas of the country actually that have not been affected by that, but they're few and far between. There's some more in some of the rural areas. But what advice would you have to your listeners out there, in particular loan officers with, let's say, less than 2 or 3 years experience, on some specifics on how they could attack that issue?
Right. I think number one is remain persistent. I think too many people give up too soon. John, I think you need to make calls consistently over a long period of time and show the realtors that you're going to hang in there, and not get discouraged and fade away if you don't get business after 3 or 4 or 5 sales calls. I think you need to be persistent. If you're calling on the office, even if they have the barriers up, the longer you come around, the more familiar you'll be, and the looser and more comfortable everybody will become with you, and you can gain access simply that way. The other thing I would advise is to become a student of the real estate and mortgage industry. Try to become known as an expert in the field, so that they begin to want to seek you out as well as you seek them out. If you take this time in your first couple of years to study as much as you can and latch yourself on to as many successful people as you can, probably sounds like a good commercial for what you're doing here, but I think this is a wonderful thing because you're going to gain access to 100 or better people that are tremendous producers and can give you very good ideas about what to do. And that's key also, I think, is becoming an expert in your field, being recognized as such, and you will find then realtors will seek you out as much as you'll seek them out.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment because it's been brought up in a tangential way in several other areas, and not really explored from a realtor standpoint. By that I mean, in the 70-plus interviews I've done, I've talked to people who work with CPAs exclusively, or financial planners. I've talked to somebody who does about $80 million a year, works only with attorneys and referrals into niche markets, and some of these people are CPAs, for example. They have expertise in doing self-employed, but whatever it is, they bring something to the table in terms of expertise for the areas that they have gone after. And I think what you're saying really is very apropos for the realtor market. Areas that come to mind are, for example, having loan officers getting a real estate license so they know how to read a real estate contract, attending some of the realtor classes, taking some bookkeeping courses so you can read a balance sheet and a P&L statement and interpret it. So I agree with you. There are areas of expertise that loan officers can develop beyond just showing up with a rate sheet and knocking on a door.
That's correct. The man that hired and trained me at Perpetual many years ago actually had his GRI. So my branch manager was a graduate realtor, and and he was very successful, and that told me something and a lot of realtors that I spoke to about him felt like that was, it stood out among his peers that he was willing to take the time to learn their business and learn the market. And in my area, John, it's a small community. We've gone from probably 50,000 people to 150,000 people since I've been in the mortgage business. And in this small area, the thing that often sets you apart from somebody else isn't your rates or and that's probably known in every area, but especially in a small area like this, rates and programs aren't as much of an issue generally as the professionalism and the knowledge of the loan officer.
Yeah. And I would split a bit of a hair with you there, and you say it's 150,000. The fact of the matter is, you're going to be 300,000 and 450,000. That area of yours is really poised for massive growth, and yet at the same time, I think you have a point. It is a rural area that is exploding, has a rural feel to it, and still has a bit of the good old boy network that's going to survive for some time to come.
Right. Right. Even though I think that's becoming less of an emphasis now, you're right. In the past, it was more on who you knew than what you knew, where today I think it's evolved into, you have to be a professional person, because many times I'm competing against a lot of the guys you're interviewing that are doing 80 and 100 million in Fairfax County or suburban Maryland, the DC market. I'm interviewing against a lot of top, very professional guys, competing for their business for my customers, and I have to be equally as sharp in order to gain the customer's trust and to convince them to come here. And I think thrown is the little bit of the southern lilt of my voice and the small town customer service that the people are moving to an area like mine. They're seeking that out. So I also, providing those things helps a great deal, but I also still have to be equally able to talk on the same level and appear and be as professional as some of the top loan officers in the D.C. market.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've been very good talking about conceptually what needs to be done, but what are some of the specifics that you do yourself in working with realtors, stuff that other people could emulate? Well, one of the things I do is the follow-up. When a realtor refers me a customer, I follow up as soon as I've spoken to the customer, either on the phone or in person. The realtor, one of the things I've tried to establish with the realtor is that they get immediate callbacks. If the realtor themselves call me, I call them back immediately. When you initially called me, John, I think I called you back within 5 or 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. I think that's very important. I think one of the biggest mistakes loan officers make is sitting on a telephone call for an hour or 2 hours or 2 days or whatever it is. I think you immediately call people back. And when the realtor refers me to customer, I let the realtor know that referral is important to me, and I call them back immediately and let them know how it goes, good or bad news. They know right away what I found out from this customer and when the next time the customer and I intend to get together or make contact, and what the customer's future plans are with that realtor if I know that at that time. Because many times the realtors will refer me somebody before they have them totally locked down. So I try to give them that positive feedback. So one of the things I've tried to do is be very responsive and give excellent feedback that way. Once a loan's in process, we also continue to contact the realtor on a regular basis and let them know what the status of the loan is. When I'm working with a builder, John, I actually have weekly meetings with the builder and his staff and go over the loans individually with them. With a realtor, I don't tend to do that, but they do get a phone update once a week. They do. Yeah, I think it's important to get back. It's funny, that's a recurring theme that goes through people who work with realtors. I would say practically everybody I've interviewed that deals with realtor makes it a conscious point to get back to a realtor as soon as they call, even if the call is simply to say, can't talk to you, in a loan app, got your call, we'll call you back.
Right.
It's that instant feedback. Realtors are kind of a funny breed, and I don't always mean that as a compliment. They're, for the most part, I think you find realtors, because they know they're in control of the loan many times, they get very jumpy, and you don't return a call quickly. They're just going to the next person on the list. And while some of that is certainly understandable in today's age, they want to know, and I would even agree with it, the fact of the matter is you don't get a lot of time to respond today.
No, you don't. And so that's probably number one on my list with realtors, is become responsive. The other thing is not to overpromise, to always deliver what I say I'm going to deliver when I'm going to deliver it.
How about an example of that?
An example of that would be if they sent me a customer that I didn't think I could work with, or it would be iffy. The loan is iffy. I let the realtor know that right away. I don't stretch it out. I don't let them know that, I don't promise that we could do a loan we can't do. I also don't overpromise time frame. Many times we can do a loan in a week. If there's a reason we can't do the loan in a week, I let them know right up front. I don't give them the impression that we're going to do something we can't do. And I know that was a lesson I had to learn when I first started out. I wanted to please everybody and wanted to make things happen and be Superman, and that's very hard to do. But, however, I would encourage people listening, if you are a new loan officer, when you first go out and make your calls, the realtors are not going to give you their best deals probably. And take those deals and work them. Just be responsive with them. It doesn't mean that, if you take a deal from that agent and it's an iffy deal, let the realtor know it right up front, but let them know you're working hard to make the deal happen. And you have the time at that stage of your career to do that. So they will appreciate the effort that you've put into it, rather than getting a deal that, one of those deals, and saying no problem, no problem, no problem, and a week before closing there's a problem. You just let them know right up front what the circumstances are with the loan, and that you're working very hard on it, and stay responsive by updating them regularly on where you are. And don't promise them that the loan will happen if you really don't think it will. And involve the underwriter or the manager of your office to let them, if you're not certain what will happen, seek the other people in your office that can help you put the deal together. Yeah,
and I think by extension, there's another thing that's interesting, too, that you've brought up, and that is, underwriters, and a lot of loan officers out there shake their heads on this, can be your friends, and they're worth developing relationships with. At times when you're working a deal that's iffy, even though you're keeping in touch with somebody, there still is a certain tension, because, first off, a realtor has a lot of money potentially on the line. But if you work closely with your underwriter up front on this, even before it's fully processed, lots of times you can get some very specific insight on why a loan isn't going to go and what needs to be done. If it doesn't go, you have the cover of going back to the realtor saying, I've talked to an underwriter, she's got 30 years experience in the business, and this is the reason it will not go. On the other hand, if there's a chance, you can get back and say, look, this is what the underwriter, I took it in, she did me a favor. These are the things that we're going to need to work on if we need to have a chance. And I think the whole purpose of the exercise is that when, really, it's not so much when the deal goes down, it's when the deal doesn't go down, so that you have done everything possible, and so that realtor cannot turn to you and say, God, what do you let me know about this now? I mean, that, which is the kiss of death, not only with the realtor, with everyone else they're going to pollute within a couple of hours.
You're exactly right, and that's one of the most dangerous things is, and I know it all too well working in a small market, is I believe that, and it goes back to, some earlier comments about appearing as a professional. One of the early things I learned in this business that, your perception, early on, the perception of you is a lot stronger than the reality, and you want to create a perception that you're a professional in every way and that you work at a professional office. The realtor doesn't need to know that you're struggling behind the scenes with the underwriter to work the loan. The realtor just needs to know specifically what's happening at that time. That you don't need to, I guess when I said keep them in contact, I think another early mistake is to probably over-explain things on the loan to the realtor. But you know, you want to have the perception that you're on top of things. You're keeping the deal going for them. And when a realtor gives you a loan, they're in essence handing you their paycheck. So that's an enormous amount of trust that they place in you, and I never try to forget that.
Yeah, right, exactly. What are some of the other things? You raise the issue of controlled business arrangements and the fact that it's not easy to get into offices as it used to be. That's a fact of life, certainly in the urban areas or larger areas and areas like yours. That's reality. But what specifically can loan officers do to work their way around that problem, from getting into the office to, thinking outside the box and developing relationships?
John, one approach that we've tried to take here is find what the controlled business arrangement is. It goes back to being knowledgeable about your market and knowledgeable about your competition. I hate to keep stressing that, but it's I think one of the cornerstones for me is to constantly be learning and constantly stay on top of the business. You really need to become a student of the business. But what we've tried to do is find out what the controlled business is not good at and become very good at that, and approach the realtors in the office where the controlled business arrangement is with that particular product and use that as a door opener. A specific example would be in Virginia. We have a state of Virginia program called the VHDA, the Virginia Housing Development Authority.
Sure.
It isn't a big moneymaker for the branch or the loan officer typically, but it is a good door opener for these controlled business arrangements because most of the time they don't have approval from the state for these VHDAs. If you become an expert in the VHDA loan, or if I am an expert in the VHDA loan, I can approach the realtor in that office as the expert on that product and am not in direct competition initially with the controlled business arrangement. Once I bring that realtor in on what's traditionally perceived as a tough product, do an excellent job on it, keeping the realtor informed, all the things we've talked about up to this point, then I can approach the realtor for other forms of business and say, wouldn't you rather give your paycheck to me where you know you're going to close on time, we're going to meet all our promises, and you don't have to worry about your paycheck and you can go on and sell another deal, rather than deal with the controlled business arrangement, which oftentimes things don't work as smoothly just because of the nature of the way they're put together. And that would be the number one thing I would say is we try to find out what they're not good at and be better at, and be good at that one thing and use that as a door opener. As far as thinking outside of the box goes, we have done things to attract realtors to us. We've brought in outside speakers to have seminars and sponsored those.
And tell me a little bit about that. I like that.
Yeah, I brought in a guy. He actually was a tight end for the Green Bay Packers years ago in the 60s.
What was his name?
Jeff Elias. You remember that?
No, I'm not a big guy. I see a couple Redskins game a year. That's it.
He's written a fairly decent financing manual, and the seminar was free to us if we guaranteed a certain number of realtors. So that didn't bother me because I have a good sales force. We put everybody on the street and really pushed the seminar and brought over 220 realtors in a small market that I've told you about.
That's huge, sure.
Into a rented hotel room, ballroom, and given a seminar. This guy sold out of books. We became, again, perceived as the expert in the marketplace on real estate finance because we sponsored the guy. And actually, the guy did a real good job for us, allowing us to have some podium time and allowing us to kind of be perceived as his partner in this seminar, and we were the experts, not just him.
What was the value added for him? I mean, was he selling books?
He was selling books and tapes, John. And he was expecting about 100, I forget, it was just over 100 people we had told him. That was our number to have it free, and we about doubled it. So he ended up taking orders and having to to ship books and tapes, so he was extremely pleased.
So okay, and he did a good job, which leads me to ask you, what was his name again?
Jeff Elias.
Elias, for the Green Bay Packers. How would someone get hold of him if they were listening to this and wanted to engage him?
You know, John, I can call you back with that information. He's in my Rolodex, but I don't.
Okay, well, at some point in these, you're going to have your email posted up on the interview, so they'll be able to get hold of you if someone was interested.
Yes,
and I think you will get some interviews on that. Anything that can bring those kind of numbers in, that's great, and especially since he did a great job. That's and there was no charge to you.
There was no charge, but there are other people. I have also done 203K seminars with just internal people. North American's done a very good job over the years of attracting people that are good at the 203K business. I know our Northern Virginia office has done a very good job with this, and we've emulated it some. That seminar we do at the Board of Realtors office. It gives the realtors their continuing ed credit, and we provide lunch and a half-day seminar on the 203K program. You know, and typically you can get the housing consultant, credit bureau, PMI company. You know, there are different people that will help you sponsor these seminars, so it's not always a big cost for the loan officer. But I like doing that type of seminar selling, because, again, it attaches that perception that you're more than just somebody stuffing rate sheets in a box. You're trying to educate. You're trying to become their partner and educate them, so that they'll bring you loans, but you're also, again, being perceived as the expert in real estate finance in the marketplace. But I think, and maybe that's because I was an old school teacher, too, that I'm good with, comfortable with that. But one thing I would advise people is even if you are not an old school teacher, through your local JCs, there's a Speak Up program. There's an organization called Toastmasters. I would work hard on your public speaking, because I believe that one call with 50 or 100 potential customers to sell is much easier than one call where you're going in the door cold and hoping to sell one person.
Right.
That seminar selling, I'm a great fan of, and have used that over the years.
Yeah, and it's been very successfully used by others. One that comes to mind for those who are listening to this, they may want to, when they finish this class or another time, remember a class by a fellow named Ed Navarro, Naworol, and he's with SunTrust and works the border area of Upper Maryland, Northern Maryland, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. Very interesting person, major producer, very articulate, and he is real big on seminars. Now, he does it with a different category. He gets people in that have lots and that are going to build, and they are very effective, and he brings builders in, and so then he's capturing the builders because these people eventually going to build homes. And it's just very interesting how he uses a seminar system, how he lays it out near a main road, and the things that he does, and it's relatively inexpensive. I like what you're saying out here, because for a couple of reasons, one of which you did mention. And the reason I like it is because, first off, it's educational, and if you can go to a manager in an office and in essence offer them something for free that's going to increase their volumes, you're not only going to capture the realtor to go to it, but you're also going to take the burden off the manager, because the managers don't know anything about 203Ks or VHDA. Half the time they could care less about learning about it. And so you're bringing value added to the transaction. But there's something else that's interesting here, too, for people that are listening that I think you've brought up quite eloquently. And that's the fact with something like VHDA, and for those listeners out there, that's nothing more than a Virginia State program for first-time home buyers, has all sorts of little bells and whistles that you can imagine, from subsidizing down payments, has some restrictions on it, but enables first-time home people to get in, as you would suspect. 203K, most of you should know out there, a lot of rehab stuff that can be a complicated kind of loan to do. do can also be a very profitable loan. But in essence, this is nothing more than analogous to, in the commercial real estate market, to what I call someone having a spike. Doug Jamal in the Washington area is legendary for going around Washington and buying little slivers of land on blocks on heavily trafficked land. He'll buy a little store and then hold out, so when the assemblage is done, he's the last guy, out and holds the spike. I think there's something tangential here in the sense that you have these programs that are not well known that you can go in and become the expert on, in essence, driving a spike into the deal with your knowledge and then expanding from there. And I think I think you're right on with that. That's something the loan officers can do. I mean, that's a no-brainer.
I agree, and it's something where you're investing the only asset you really have at the early stage of your career, which is time. I mean, John, I used to, when I first got started with this, I would work my regular day, making my calls, doing my office work, and that sort of thing, and took something home with me every night to study. Until I would I would ask PMI companies for manuals, take the VHDA manuals. Many times, too, John, I find that there are people that support the mortgage industry that have not only training materials, but people that will help train you if you go to them and ask them. And you can go to the manager of your mortgage company office, or in the case of when I first got started, I went directly to a lot of these folks and asked them. I called my credit bureau and asked them if they could send a rep down to explain to me how to read credit reports. I think if you get aggressive that way, and also I found, and you obviously know this, that people are somewhat flattered if you call them and ask them questions. I never had a problem interviewing somebody for knowledge that they didn't agree to take at least some amount of time with me. You mentioned Mark Stam, who is a legendary builder loan officer with Perpetual Mortgage Company. He ran our builder division, not loan officer. Probably one of the busiest people I've ever known in the mortgage business, and I managed to get a fair amount of time, I feel like, from Mark, because it becomes flattering to pass your knowledge on to somebody else. And that's something I always try to remember, and a technique I always try to use, and one you're using real well here. But it helps you a great deal.
Right.
I think with the realtors in the marketplace is to become, as you said, learn that spike, drive it in, expand from there. And there's even areas, you mentioned CPAs and attorneys and that kind of thing. I have found that the Chamber of Commerce many times needs speakers for things that they're doing. They have a hard time getting people for. The Board of Realtors have, just basic classes they offer. They have an education committee. They need to put on programs. If you become comfortable with public speaking and just gain a little knowledge, you can many times sell from that platform. And it's worked real well for me, and I think it could work real well for a lot of other people.
Yeah, and I think by extension, I just like to add a comma after that sentence, because there are a lot of loan officers out there who are not good public speakers. They're very good one-on-one. You better be good one-on-one if you want to stay in this business. But when it comes to, and talking up to 5 people, no problem. You get that 6th person up there, they're turned into jelly. And there's a lot of people, it's a natural human instinct. I remember years ago when I was in business, I would call the VHDA down in Richmond, down on the waterfront where they have those nice offices, and I assume they're still there. I would call them and ask them to send up an expert, and they were only too, and I don't know if they do it today, but they were only too happy to oblige. And you could build a seminar around them, bring another person in, bring an underwriter in, and all you got to do is the intro. So you do not have to be necessarily a good public speaker. If you can't be a public speaker, be a good assembler of the knowledge.
You've made a good point there, and you went back to, I didn't touch on it, but I've worked with the same underwriter now for 10 years, and couldn't get along without her. But one thing that I find that if I'm ever having a tough time getting in to see a group of people, if I offer to bring my underwriter with me, it opens a lot of doors. That's another reason to become friends with your underwriter. And I would also say that in many cases, your underwriter never gets a chance to get out of the office and interact with the public, and they often started as processors and other public contact people, and are good at that. They're good at customer service, and you could build a seminar around just bringing your underwriter and an expert from another area with you. You're exactly right, and probably have great success selling it to realtors and getting into offices where you otherwise couldn't.
Yeah, and there's another area that we have not talked about that can be equally as good, and that's that's taking these same kind of concepts and having seminars on VHDA or 203K or whatever, creating seminars for clients out there. When you bring people in, and Ed Navarro does this, there's a couple of people who are really masters of this. Don Ehrman works for SunTrust down in Harrisonburg, Virginia. He'll have seminars and bring the local populace in, people who are interested in how they can purchase a first home or whatever. But then what he does with these incredible leads, people that are interested, he then parcels them back out to his chosen realtors. And when you give somebody ready, willing, and able, who has been pre-qualified, in many cases pre-approved by him, to a realtor, you've made a friend forever.
Yes, you have. And that's one thing that a lot of people tell you is that if you can, in today's market with these controlled business arrangements and with the other things going on, the restrictions getting into real estate offices, we as mortgage people need to try to learn to control the customer as much as the realtor does. Anything we can do to bring the customer to the realtor, obviously they'll love you and become loyal to you. But also, I think we need to come up with ways to get in front of the customer first, so that they're attracted to us and want to remain loyal to us, even if they shift around to many different realtors before they buy a house.
Exactly. And the other thing is, what does it cost to rent a room off of 95 at a Holiday Inn? $150.
Right.
It's nothing. I mean, that's like 1/7 of one extra deal. They're nothing to do these sort of things. I had an interesting interview. I can't remember their name. I wish I could. With someone out in may have been even it was out in Arizona, out in, I think, Tempe, Arizona. Guy was really kind of cool. He was very much like you. He was deliberative, knew exactly what he wanted to say, and had some great ideas. And one of the ideas that he had is that every month he gets a bus. Really 2 buses. He gets 1 bus for one day, and he gets all the realtors in his area. They meet at a park, and he doesn't sell himself, but by extension, of course, he is. And he gets them, and they make tours of all the different houses around. And he provides lunches and breakfast, and it's something that it's not unique to him, but I thought that was kind of a neat idea. The other idea that he does, he gets another bus, and he does advertising, and he gets people who are looking for homes. He gets this really nice bus, I guess, has some sort of a lunch or whatever. They all meet in the park under a tent, and then he all puts them on there and takes them around to the different open homes. Now, you talk about building loyalty with realtors for, virtually nothing in terms of price. I'm certain that people come up to him and want to get pre-qualified. He probably has people that do not have realtor relationships, so he's, got stuff there. I mean, it's just a total winner for a very inexpensive price.
And not only that, John, you mentioned the price, and I'll come back to, again, I think if you ask a local title company, a local credit bureau company, a PMI company, an appraiser, some of these people will help you offset the cost of doing something like that. The title business has gotten very competitive in our area, as I'm sure it is in the rest of the country. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, a title company would probably be glad to help you sponsor some of that. And in many cases, one of the things you could offer as part of your service in your seminar or whatever is, I'm going to have somebody from a title company or attorney's office speak on how to close, how a loan closing goes, or the legal aspects of writing a contract, that sort of thing. That's and for that opportunity to do that, they may help underwrite your endeavor, your bus or your room off at the Holiday Inn off 95, or or whatever.
Yeah, it's not only an excellent idea. You put one or two or three people together like that and bring a value-added package. You're not only establishing a relationship with the title company, you not only got people coming into the seminar that maybe going to pass on to realtors, you're virtually doing it free. So I mean, what's the lose here? And you don't even have to be a good public speaker because you can go get somebody.
Right.
Anyway, well, look, I think I'd like to end the interview on this. This
Okay.
is really good. I mean, this all makes sense. I see it only going downhill from here.
Okay,
We're really at kind of a high point, and this interview has been very substantive with really good ideas that work, and they've been proven to work. So I can't thank you enough, Brian, for taking your time to talk to us, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, thank you, John.
Okay.